Prologue. November 1965. Norman Darby chewed his bottom lip as his fingers pounded the keys, letters hammering their way onto the page. The ink was barely dry when he heard a growl from Mr. Cleeve's office. "Darby, if you moved any slower, you'd be travelling back in time. I need that feature now." "AI almost done, Mr. Cleeve," Norman called, his shoulders bunching their way to his ears. "Just putting the finishing touch. It's the news, not Shakespeare, Darby. Give me the story." The Ravensbrook's Banner was no place for the faint of heart. Norman had heard rumour of this, of course, but he could hardly have predicted the number of antacids he would take to beat back the daily heartburn his boss brought forth. With an antacid on his mind, Norman squared his shoulders and stood up straight. "Today's the day, Norman," he thought, working up the courage as he unfilled the last page of his article. "You're going to show him exactly what Norman Darby is, an investigative journalist." Norman made his way to Mr. Cleeve's office. Mr. Cleeve, however, did not even bother to look up. Mr. Cleeve's office was the stuff of nightmares, at least for Norman Darby. Norman woke up in a cold sweat at least twice a week as he dreamt of those beige filing cabinets, the thick wooden desk, the plastic plant that Norman could swear looked like it was on the verge of dying, even though it couldn't actually die. Maybe it just wanted to die. He dreamt about the brass paperweight Mr. Cleeve never let out of his sight, not even for a second, not even to leave his office for a glass of water. But most of all, Norman's nights were haunted by the spectre of Mr. Cleeve, with his burly knuckles and a flat-top so sharp the edges of his hair could cut glass. And when Norman wasn't dreaming, well, he was at the office, seeing this all in person, just like now. Mr. Cleeve lorded over his domain like a king, and Norman Darby was his ever-suffering servant. But not today. "Took long enough," Mr. Cleeve growled, extending his hand for the copy, his eyes locked on the proof spread before him. Norman took a slow, deep breath and handed the papers to his boss. He knew that this article could seal his fate forever, either as the hard-nosed investigative journalist he knew he was, or as the Ravensbrook's Banner's resident buffoon. Mr. Cleeve snatched the papers from Norman fast enough to slice a paper cut through his finger, but Norman did not flinch. He didn't dare. Instead, he waited for his boss's reaction to the headline to which he'd given such a careful consideration. Ravensbrook's Banner. More than an urban myth? Are forest protectors alive and well in Ravensbrooks? Norman didn't mean to hold his breath. He didn't even realize he was doing it until he started to wheeze. He hoped his inhaler was close by. He hoped Mr. Cleeve would read the headline. Or maybe he didn't hope he would read the headline. The room was beginning to go blurry. Was it his imagination? Or was that brass paperweight starting to glow? Norman braced himself against the doorframe and had nearly decided to turn and walk away when the strangest thing happened. Mr. Cleeve looked up. Norman Darby prided himself on his ability to read faces. He was a master at it. He could tell when a person was happy, when they were afraid, when they were lying through their teeth. It's a part of what made him such a good investigative journalist. But Mr. Cleeve was the only person he had never been able to understand. His expressions never matched his tone. His responses didn't align to his emotions. His eyes rarely matched the movements of his mouth. He was, in a word, inscrutable. And in this moment, Norman Darby had never found Mr. Cleeve less readable. They shared a strange silence in that moment. Maybe it was because he had been holding his breath for so long. But suddenly, Norman felt sick. Then, in the strangest exchange he had ever shared with his boss, Mr. Cleeve gestured to the chair on the other side of his imposing wooden desk. "Mr. Darby, why don't you have a seat?" And then Mr. Cleeve did something that Norman had never seen before. Not even when the Ravenbrooks banner received its third award of the year, or when one of the designers baked them all cheesecake brownies. Mr. Cleeve smiled. Norman Darby began to lower himself into the chair across from his boss. This was it. This was the moment. His moment. Norman's boss, the inimitable Mr. Cleeve, wanted to hear his ideas. But before he could land in the chair, Mr. Cleeve stopped him. "Oh, and close the door, would you?" Norman paused mid-squat, searching his boss's face for any sign he might have been wrong. Instead, he thought again. He saw a glimmer of light emanate from the brass paperweight Mr. Cleeve kept so closely guarded. But that was impossible, right? Norman stood and closed the door. Chapter 1. Lights behind my eyes. My head. I'm gonna puke. Whoa, it's okay, Aaron. It's okay. We'll clean you up. Just lie back down. A guy in a pair of green scrubs is looking at the floor like he doesn't know what to do. His hands are outstretched at his side. "Dr. Malcolm? Is everything—" "Oh." A woman in blue scrubs walks in and gets quiet. Her quietness permeates the room as if begging to be acknowledged. I barfed on him, I say, and hang on to the edge of the bed, squeezing the thin mattress and fighting back another wave of nausea. "I'll call maintenance," the nurse says, and exits the room. "A new set of scrubs, too," Dr. Malcolm calls after her. Another set of feet squeak down the hall, and that sound, too, is unbearably loud. I squeeze my eyes shut and fall back onto the papery pillow behind me. Did he wake up? I thought I heard this. I recognized Dad's voice immediately, and I have no idea why, but the second he walks into the room, I start to cry. I'm suddenly 4 years old and terrified and confused, and only my dad can save me. I barely open my eyes. I shake with little silent sobs, and my head is killing me. But his arms are around my neck, and he's pressing my head against him, and he's shushing me like he used to when I'd have a nightmare. This isn't a nightmare, though. I don't know what it is, but there's no question I'm awake. I hear a set of wheels roll into the room, then the snap of a mop as it does its job. Then the nurse as she hands the doctor a new set of clothes. Then the doctor excusing himself, while the nurse gently takes my arm, takes my blood pressure, takes my temperature, takes some blood with a needle, and takes her leave. The entire time, my dad doesn't say a word. He simply shushes me. Even after I've stopped crying, he keeps my head against him, cradled by his meaty forearm. He keeps his hand cupping my skull gently. "Ah, yes, all right then," says the doctor when he comes back. Only then does my dad release me, and I let myself fall back to the pillow. "Head injuries are rough," the doctor says, shaking his head slowly. "Hi, Aaron. I'm Dr. Malcolm. Malcolm, like my second-grade teacher. I think I can remember that. Ravenbrooks Hospital. Dr. Matthew Malcolm." I feel my dad tense next to me. Is he going to... The doctor holds up his hands and tamps them down, pressing the worry away. We've run all the tests, and so far, everything checks out. Aaron's going to make a full recovery. He just had a nasty fall. A nasty fall. If my brain didn't feel like it was clanging around in my head like a gong, maybe I'd be able to remember falling. From what? To where? My memory is a black hole. Dad, on the other hand, appears to be up to speed, asking questions before I can form a complete thought. "When can we take him home?" he asks, assuming all checks out. "Tomorrow should be fine," Dr. Malcolm says. It isn't long before the doctor and my dad are asking and answering questions, speaking in low voices that still hurt my head. All I can do is concentrate on the steady drip of the faucet coming from the sink in the bathroom by my bed. Its rhythmic drop into the drain echoes against my eyelids, and I try to use it as a way to mediate the pain away. But something about the patter of that drip is too familiar, too unnerving to calm me, like it's echoing through a long, dank chamber, through a tunnel. It all comes back in a wave. The tunnel leading from the weather station, the broken lantern that should have been in my grandparents' old office, the bloody smear across the wallet holding Mr. Gershowitz's ID. Panic seizes me before I can catch it, and just for a moment I can't feel the blinding pain behind my eyes. I launch to a sitting position on the bed, grasping hold of my dad's arm and startling him out of his conversation with the doctor. "Did you find it? The lantern in the tunnel?" I fell through the wall, but I didn't mean to, and all of a sudden I was running. Or I think I was. It was just so dark. And I think there was someone else in there with me. "Dad, did you find his wallet? Mr. Gershowitz's wallet?" "Aaron, calm down," Dad says quietly, prying my hand from his arm, but I can't stop myself. The questions are spilling out of me, and I urgently need them all answered. "But did you find it?" "Aaron," Dad hisses, his eyes widening as he discreetly turns his back to the doctor, covering me with his shadow. "I think you must be imagining things." His eyes are wide and his teeth are clamped shut, and I know that for some reason he wants me to shut up and nod my head, but I just can't. "Hang on, did you say Gershowitz, as in Ike Gershowitz, that missing security guard?" Dr. Malcolm says from behind my dad. Now both of them are casting their long shadows over my bed. "Aaron, I think maybe you're just confused," Dad says, leaning a little closer to me. "Any second now, I'm going to be vaporized." He faces Dr. Malcolm. "The fall from that tree was quite high." I nod back. "Yeah," I say. Dad's laser eyes lose some of their burn. He turns to Dr. Malcolm. "My son's little friend, well, his father, works for the Banner. Every gruesome headline gets talked about. You know the stuff. Robberies, disappearances, there's no censorship there. I'm sure Mr. Gershowitz's headline is the last thing he remembers," Dad says, shaking his head. Dr. Malcolm seems only partly convinced. The crease between his brows deepens as he looks from my dad to me and back to my dad. "Is it normal for him to be inventing memories like this?" Dad asks, and just like that, he almost has me thinking he's genuinely concerned about my sanity. Dr. Malcolm considers this. "Well, it's not unheard of. The brain is mysterious. So much we still don't know about it. Head injuries are different for everyone." "Then he's going to be okay?" Dr. Malcolm's face softens as Dad's concern. "Mr. Peterson, your son will be just fine. He needs some rest and more monitoring. I'll give you two a little space, but then it's time to say good night." Dad nods cooperatively and shakes Dr. Malcolm's hand. The doctor gives my foot a gentle pat over the covers before leaving us alone. Dad turns so fast it's like he's on a hinge. Now, what's this about tunnels? There are very few things I know for certain right now. I know that my name is Aaron Peterson. I know that I've lived in Raven Brooks, quite possibly the weirdest town on earth, for about 6 months, and we wouldn't live here at all, except that we had to leave Germany in a hurry, and Dad's parents conveniently left him their house in their will. I am positive that I don't know the whole story about why we had to leave Germany, and most of me is afraid to know, and I am 100% certain that the tunnels running under the weather station where my grandparents used to work is merely one squirming, slimy worm in a whole can I've managed to open. More than anything, I am crystal clear on this one fact. Now is not the time to spill the entire can. Now is the time to squeeze the lid back on. Shut it tight. Pretend I don't even know there's a lid or a can in the first place. Tunnels? Who said anything about my head? I say, pushing my palm to my forehead and squinting against the pane. What were you guys saying about a fall? I don't dare open my eyes to see if it's working. I wait for the silence to subside. To my relief, it does. You fell out of a tree, Dad says, his voice softening to the concern he expressed when he first rushed into the room. A tree? Dad chuckles. Surprised? Me too. You were never much of a climber." I let myself laugh a little, too, wondering if he knows I'm playing dumb. I don't understand. What was I doing? Where was... In the woods. During the unveiling ceremony, Dad says, his face darkening a little. Right, because I was supposed to meet my family there after the imaginary project I was working on with Trinity beforehand. My face flushes hot. Sorry, I say, and I'm not sure if I'm apologising for lying, or for not being here for this big moment, or for ruining the big moment when apparently I came crashing to the ground after inexplicably climbing a tree. Dad clears his throat. I pretend that means I forgive you. Only after I look down at my hand in shame do I see the little dirt crescents underneath my fingernails. A long splinter embedded deep into my palm has turned the flesh around it pink. In one crushing glance, the entire memory comes flooding back. I'm running through the tunnels, but someone else is running too, chasing me. No, not chasing me. I'm chasing them. The footsteps grow louder as I close the gap between us. I crash through the tunnel, taking turns blindly as I push my fear aside. There's something in my hand, something smooth and flat and folded. It's Mr. Gershowitz's wallet. Panting, I stop to listen for the footsteps and find them farther ahead now. I sprint to catch up, and slowly a sweet, familiar smell begins to fill the air. All of a sudden, I'm pushing through a heavy metal door and ducking under pipes and vats and tripping over cables. A safety bulletin posted to the wall flaps beside me as I rush past it, but I register the Golden Apple Corporation logo even in the dark of the basement. Yes, that's it. I'm underneath the Golden Apple factory. Next thing I know, I'm standing in the doorway leading out of the basement and into the forest. I look down again at my hands. Tucked inside the wallet is Mr. Gershowitz's blood-stained ID. "Come back!" I try to yell to the person I'm chasing, but my throat is parched and hoarse. It's Mr. Gershowitz. I remember now. I run after him, ducking past branches and dodging sharp twigs. The woods no longer look familiar. Panic begins to take hold again as I venture deeper and deeper into the thick overgrowth. With my lungs burning and my legs beginning to shake, I'm just about to give up when I hear the crack of a branch so close by. I thought I was chasing Mr. Gershowitz, but now that I'm nearly upon him, I start to wonder if it's really him I've been chasing. There's a disturbance in the leaves no more than 30 feet from the tree I'm hiding behind. I have to look. I've come all this way, and now I have to look. I try to swallow away my panic, but that only fills my stomach with air. Inch by inch, I creep my head around the thick trunk of the tree. I stop swallowing air and suddenly forget how to breathe. If I don't know better, I'd say it isn't breathing. Either it's so still. It could be a statue, but this thing is no statue. I cover my head to protect my eyes from flying debris. The crows come next, seemingly thousands of them, screeching their way across the purple sky like a dark jet stream, bringing chaos to the air. By the time they pass, I can't hear the voices over the speakers anymore. I can't hear anything.